Sykesville, Maryland lies in Howard and Carroll counties, about 20 miles west of Baltimore. In the summer of 1973, something strange was stalking the small town. Witnesses described seeing it in the back roads and alleyways. Something that stood about 7 feet tall and was covered in stringy dark hair and sported two huge, glowing eyes. This is the story of the Sykesville Monster. Well, good evening to all of my fellow tinfoil hats. I am just another tinfoil hat. Welcome to my show. Today, we will be discussing the fascinating case of the Sykesville Monster. So this case occurred over the summer of 1973, though it appears that the area around Sykesville has a very long-running history of weird occurrences, even up until recently. Located about 20 miles west of Baltimore and 40 miles north of Washington, D.C., today, Sykesville, Maryland is still a pretty small town, with only 4,600 residents calling it home as of the last census. However, it's big enough to have ghost tours of several of its purportedly haunted locations, which, according to Maryland Paranormal Research, includes a local distillery, producing enough spirits with your spirits jokes to last an unlifetime, and Sykesville Townhouse, built in 1893 and supposedly home to the ghost of a prankster and town policeman, Millard Cooper, today leaning into that prankster side of his persona as a phantom that enjoys moving things, spooking people, smoking ghostly cigars, and, perhaps most disturbingly, making people's coffee disappear. Yeah, that's a little too far. That's just not cool, Coop. Not even for a ghost. Now, the weird phenomena isn't relegated to that of the ghostly side either. On March 1st of this year, someone reported seeing strobing lights flying east to west and then hovering in place. If this pattern holds, maybe we'll be seeing a rash of Bigfoot reports coming out of the Sykesville area. Because today we are looking at a rash of weirdness that involved many sightings of this Bigfoot-like creature in Sykesville. However, it bears many similarities to other of these so-called Bigfoot flap occurrences, like Momo the Missouri Monster or Momo's cousin Roro the Rochdale creature, where you have all of these sightings of Bigfoot-like creatures which were kicked off by a UFO event. And this kind of conglomeration of weirdness that we're discussing today is the story of the Sykesville Monster. Regarding the Sykesville Monster, there was a UFO sighting in the area of Sykesville right before the Monster Mash really started. However, as a quick little side note, in going through old papers for this case, I also dug up this account. According to the couple interviewed, the Grubbs, they had been seeing weird stuff in the sky for months. They said that there was this patch of light in the sky that Stanley Grubbs described as the color of sparks flying off of copper, that kind of electric green. He and his wife claimed to see this bizarre occurrence nightly, and through telescopes they saw that it was accompanied by a red light, which flashed on and off in a manner that made it seem like it was circling some bigger object, kind of vanishing when it moved behind it. Now, this is a weird little side note to this case, because it occurred about an hour away from Sykesville, Maryland in Smithburg, but I figured I'd include it here just to show that, in the greater area, there was this long-running example of odd phenomena going on. It also really calls to mind to me some of the sightings around the infamous Mothman of Point Pleasant. When Keel interviewed many farmers in the area, they said that they would see these kind of nebulous purple lights in the sky. And so again, interesting little side note. But the disturbance immediately before the monster disturbance is said to have come in the form of a UFO that was spotted over a reservoir in Sykesville, Maryland. People who saw it claimed that it had flashing lights and descended over the reservoir before dropping off a large object and then vanishing into the night. This was shortly before the story really gets started. Now, there's something really interesting because at the time, this is in the 60s and 70s, you have some researchers tying Bigfoot and UFO accounts. But in Sykesville, you had people tying this in an extremely physical way. They believed that the UFO literally dropped down a Bigfoot and just let it loose in the Sykesville area. Now again, while I do think that Bigfoot and UFO reports are definitely connected, needless to say, I don't really think it's some little green men dropping down their big fuzzy friend. The story of the Sykesville Monster itself begins on Tuesday, May 29th of 1973, when police responded to a call from a man named Anthony Dorsey. Dorsey said that he was watching The Late Show when he heard his dog way out in the woods just going absolutely berserk. Dorsey was surprised to hear the dog that far out in the woods, and when he went outside to see what the matter was, he heard something crashing through the underbrush. He shone his flashlight into the woods in the direction of the noise and saw two large glowing eyes. Dorsey was a volunteer firefighter for Sykesville. I actually found his obituary. Unfortunately, he passed away in September of 2017. But he was a firefighter, not just in Sykesville, but also a career firefighter until 1996. Now, Dorsey, in this instance, described these eyes as the size of jumbo marbles. I love these very specific descriptors in these cases. It's just fantastic. About 5 inches apart, and with how high up they were, he said that this thing must have been about 7 feet tall. Dorsey called the police, and Officer Charles Rupp arrived shortly thereafter, though unfortunately he found nothing. No prowler, no animal, and certainly no monster in the area. However, the next day, Police Chief Omer Herbert went to the Dorsey property, and with Anthony, they kind of looked around in the area, and about 50 yards away from the house, they discovered a set of 3 footprints. Now, each of these footprints was about 13.5 inches long, 6 inches wide, and barefoot. The Friday after Dorsey's experience, an out of town truck driver also claimed to see the creature. He reported seeing it sitting on the roadside. He described the thing as being covered in dark brown hair, and he said that it seemed to be caked with mud from the waist down. The truck driver said that he came up to the thing sitting on the side of the road. However, as he approached in his vehicle, he said that it stood up to its full 7 to 8 foot height and dashed into the woods. All told, there would be about 20 sightings of the creature over the summer in the Sykesville area. On Saturday, a woman named Hazel Shepard heard the sound of something crashing through the woods in her backyard. The Sunday after that, 3 people, Bessie, Elston, and Diane Gassaway — some reports list her as Diane Coleman, not sure if this is like a married name situation — of Schoolhouse Road in Sykesville, they all claimed to see a grayish-white haired, 8 foot tall creature walking through their backyard. Diane also said that something was heard stomping near the door of the home and, even creepier than this, trying to get inside. A new family dog went totally nuts after hearing this and tried to break his leash and go after it. Weirdest of all, however, the Gasways claimed that there was no trace, no footprints or anything around the door. Diane's brother, Howard Gassaway, also claimed to see the creature and set about patrolling the area with a rifle, as seen in this picture. Now, I'm not sure if this was his, but there is even an account, according to Slayton Berry's book Bigfoot, of someone shooting at this Bigfoot-like creature from a distance of about 20 feet. However, as with so many of these cases, the creature simply responded by vanishing in front of the witness's very eyes. According to investigator John Lutz, who apparently had a really good relationship with law enforcement at the time of the Sykesville encounters, an officer who responded to one of these nighttime sightings claimed to be thrown 15 feet in the air by some unknown being. Now, this account is in stark contrast to the earlier attempts of the local authorities to blame the sightings of a local showing of the legend of Boggy Creek. They thought it was all just a case of hysteria. Though I will say another very common occurrence in these monster flaps is the emergence of monster hunting posses, which definitely occurred here, so I can absolutely understand why the authorities were trying to calm the situation. As Chief Herbert told the Baltimore Sun regarding the monster hunters of Sykesville, they don't know what they're looking for. They're jittery. If one comes over one ridge with a rifle and one comes over another ridge, well. So, with all of this going on, you can kind of see how the authorities would want to just pin it on something and be done with it. As frustrating as that is for, people like me trying to actually research the sightings and what happened. On the topic, too, of the papers, there were a few more I consider personally unconfirmed activities of the creature relating to animal deaths in the area. According to the papers, though, they could never really pin down if this was legitimately tied to the creature, if this was actually happening. One report even said it's always someone else's cows or dogs. So again, I'm considering this kind of an unconfirmed, may or may not have happened sort of thing. However, as the summer of 1973 wore on in the area around Sykesville, reports continued to come in of the creature lurking in town, in alleyways, outside of houses. Teresa Jackson said that she saw the tall, hair-covered hominid in an alley just outside of her home. She said that this thing had abnormally large features, with dark, stringy hair hanging in front of its face. However, she said that the eyes are what captured her attention the most. She claimed that they glowed in the dark. So, this, in my opinion, is another classic of the flap variety. Also, another really neat thing that I dug up, you had a ton of investigators on this case. I mean, even Ivan T. Sanderson visited the county looking into this ordeal. A whole bunch of people over the course of a relatively short time saw something unexplained. We see this time and time again with cases of greater popularity like Momo the Missouri Monster or the infamous Mothman of Point Pleasant. Of course, there are numerous cases of UFO flaps, and that's where the term originally derives from. It's like for a short time, these places become haunted by something, whether that's a UFO or a fleet of different UFOs, as is more often the case, or cryptids or poltergeist phenomena, or as we often see, all of the above. It just happens with more regularity in a given place at a given time. And this case is certainly no exception to that. Before the sightings of the creepy creature began, we have the sighting of a UFO, very similar to countless other cases where a UFO, or, in my personal opinion, more clearly defined, simply a light anomaly, kind of takes place and then harkens in or accompanies this period of intense cryptid phenomenon. We see this in the case of Roro the Roachdale creature, Momo the Missouri Monster, or even the veritable Bigfoot flap, which occurred in Frankfurt, Wisconsin in 1991, covered in my video, The Furry Frankfurt Freak, which I'll include a link to that in the description. You have so many of these, you know, again, monster flaps or I mean monster mash type situations happening where the initial sighting of anything odd is this light anomaly. And then it just seems to usher in this period of very high strangeness with all of these cryptid reports. Now, additionally to, the light anomaly observed prior to the sightings of the Sykesville Monster, we also have this notion that comes up time and time again where witnesses claim that the cryptid's eyes glow in the dark, not just a simple reflection, but glowing as though they kind of contain light or are their own light source. Researchers like John Keel postulated that the light anomalies, the so-called soft sightings, may be the only integrally true part of the phenomena, while the rest of it is far less true, is simply the mask or dressing of the encounter. And Keel also believed that in seeing, cryptids like Bigfoot, the way that you could tell if it was a genuine animal, a cryptid in the true sense of the word, some undiscovered, primate in the case of Bigfoot encounters, was if it had glowing eyes. If it did have glowing eyes, he believed that it was likelier some sort of, kind of transitive manifestation of the phenomena. I will note too, again, kind of speaking of John Keel, I guess, the initial sighting by Anthony Dorsey, especially given the dog's response and the glowing eyes, really reminds me of a true benchmark case of high strangeness, and that is one of the very first Mothman encounters, the Partridge encounter. Of course, this was when a man by the name of Merle Partridge began experiencing electrical interference on his TV, and his dog Bandit became extremely distressed. When Merle investigated outside, he saw red lights, now not eyes but lights, rotating in a nearby field. Bandit ran after the disturbance and was never seen again. Now, in my opinion, the prevalence of these loud crashing noises, so often associated with a Bigfoot, quote unquote, trying to get in the house, can also be neatly correlated to the loud bangs and pops of poltergeist phenomenon. It is just kind of, it's one of those nonsensical aspects. Bigfoot is this giant, strong, ape-like creature. If it wanted to get in the house, truthfully, it could just break down the door and come inside. But so often we have people saying they believe Bigfoot was trying to get in. Again, it could just rip through a door like a piece of cardboard. So I think that it's more about this kind of this pattern or this storyline, this trope that occurs of the beast trying to get in the house. But again, ties in very neatly to poltergeist effects. Even the report of the officer being tossed 15 feet by some unseen assailant, no less, not necessarily an unidentified assailant or a Bigfoot-like creature, but an unseen assailant, also calls to mind classic accounts of poltergeists tossing people about like rag dolls. However, one of the most intriguing parts of this case has got to be the report of someone shooting at this creature at a range of 20 feet and it vanishing in front of their very eyes. Of course, this happens time and time again in these more high strangeness Bigfoot encounters. Someone takes aim at a creature, fires, and then the creature just simply vanishes. Or, as in the case of some of the sightings investigated by Stan Gordon, vanishes into a flash of light or a shower of sparks. All this seems to point to the concept that there is something more to these sightings than simply an undiscovered primate. Though, to complicate matters, this thing can't be purely immaterial for the simple fact that it leaves material traces, as in the case of the footprints left on the Dorsey property something truly paradoxical. You can't really put it in the totally immaterial category. You can't really put it in the totally material category. Well, if you enjoyed this episode on the Sykesville Monster, please like. And if you're new to this field of crop circles, go ahead and subscribe to see what weirdness the future may have in store. Till then, you can keep up with me on my free blog at patreon.com/justanothertinfoilhat. And please tune into the podcast Somewhere in the Skies, not just for the very best and anomalous listening, but also for episodes of Just Another Tinfoil Hat. For today, I am Zelia Edgar, signing off.
Doing.